Oh, hello. Welcome to this interview. I'm Francis Seeley from Enfield Voices and GlobalNet 21, and we try to do regular interviews around a number of subjects. And today we've got with us Alan Sitkin, who you can see here at the moment, and I'll be going straight to him in a minute. What we're going to talk about today is major redevelopments that local authorities take place in their area. All local authorities are engaged in developments of some kind, and they often create a lot of controversy. And in Enfield, where we're focusing our interview today, there is a project called Meridian Waters, and that has created quite a lot of stir and quite a lot of feeling. So I'm going to introduce Alan Sitkin now, who used to be a councillor and was on the cabinet and had an overview of that particular project, and ask him first of all to tell us what Meridian Waters is. So welcome, Alan, and please let us know what the project was.
It's a huge brownfield site right next to IKEA and Tesco, down just below the North Circular. It's in proximity to, as I said before, the fourth most deprived ward in all of London. And it's a very ambitious, holistic project where we're trying both to build a large quantity of housing units, as well as creating employment opportunities, and specifically industrial employment opportunities. So it's a very, very big project, which has been up and running for quite a while, actually. It was earlier in the planning stage, and now it's moved on. But that's what.
Yeah, I gather it's about a £6 billion project with about 10,000 homes being built. And I was just wondering if you could let us know what you think will be, in your view, the principal social and economic benefits of this project.
I'll answer that, but first I'd like to say the number 6 billion and 10,000 homes have been used often, but in fact, those numbers are not finalized, and they won't be finalized for 25 years. So there have been different proposals. At one juncture, somebody was talking about 12,750 homes. There have been other proposals talking about 8,000 odd homes. As for the 6 billion number, that depends on what you're talking about. The value is today, the value in 20 years. So I think we should stay away from numbers like that. I'm sorry, I went away from your question. Your question was, please?
The question was, what are the economic and social benefits?
Right. From the very outset, I was minded, certainly, and I was a part of the government's team advancing this project for 4 years, from 2014 to 2018. I was very minded that this should not only be a housing and a residential and a dormitory zone, but there should also be employment opportunities for local people. So that's one benefit. The other benefit is to have a minimum quantum of X affordable and social housing units, also in the hope that local people struggling to get on the housing ladder will be able to get a place to live. And last but not least, there's a whole concept called placemaking. This is not a very pretty area right now, and it's not very attractive, and it's a waste when there's so little land in London. And we wanted also to build a place which will have schools, which have socio-cultural amenities. So actually, we've been very ambitious. I should say we were very ambitious, and we're trying to hit all three levels.
Okay. I mean, homes obviously are a very big issue right across the country and in Enfield as well. And everyone is concerned that the homes on the site, a lot of them will be affordable. What do we mean by affordable, and will there be affordable homes on that site?
So the definition given by Boris Johnson, the previous mayor, as to affordable homes was 80% of market rent. Now, as a lot of us know, market rents have skyrocketed to the extent that 80% can scarcely be considered affordable for a lot of people. And so, I mean, this is, how do I say this? There are ambitions to hit at least 35%. Sadiq Khan talks about 50%. That's great. But push comes to shove in the negotiations with the people who will actually be building the homes, the developers. And it's the same problem that you have everywhere. The more that you increase the percentage of affordable and or social homes, the less margin there is for the developer, and the fewer homes the developer is probably willing to build. So there's constantly a back and forth between the council and the developers on the quantum of affordable homes and the number of homes. They're interrelated, the two concepts.
Okay, so maybe we'll go to that again a bit more in a minute. But when you first envisaged the scheme and you sort of planned it in the early days, you had the idea of having a single developer. And can you tell us about that? Because both you had one who then disappeared and didn't want to do it, and then you had another one that was based in Hong Kong who didn't want to do it. Why weren't either of these signed up?
Okay. So we came in, when I came to cabinet in 2014, some work had already been done by my predecessor, a guy named Del Goddard, in planning the area. But we were in the process at the time of negotiating with the GLA 20 million pounds in housing zone funds to get the project kickstarted. One of the preconditions of that allocation was that we engaged in what's called a master development framework agreement, where we would deal with one developer who would then subcontract and develop all of the site, but the council would go through one developer. So therefore, that's why we had a master developer framework agreement from the outset. We were kind of told to by government, or central government, I should say, or GLA. And that meant that we were locked in for a couple of years to trying to do the best we could to get the best deal possible with the winners of the procurement exercise that we organized. And as you saw, the winner was Barrett's originally, with the silver medal had gone to a company called PCPD. So we were obliged contractually from the outset to try to get a good deal with, first with Barrett's, and then when that didn't work, with PCPD.
So, I mean, you wanted to go down this particular avenue of working one developer. I mean, did you make any progress in doing that while you were, involved in that, or did things go all, pear-shaped?
Two things. First of all, I can't say that I, quote unquote, wanted to go down that path. There was no choice. This was.
No, it's all right. Carry on. No, it's okay. Carry on. Forget it.
So it's not that I, quote unquote, wanted to work with the master developer. There was no choice. That was the system which had been organized, and largely because of the demands of the GLA in terms of allocating its housing zone funding. What went wrong with the developers? I need to respect certain commercial confidentiality, but I can say one thing that did affect the negotiations, which is between the time which we concluded our procurement exercise, Barrett's came in first place, PCPD came in second place. Shortly thereafter, there was the Brexit vote. And trust me, that had a material effect on developers' risk appetite and their willingness to invest in Meridian water. And without going to details, that is one answer to your question, is things went less well after the Brexit vote than they had gone before. There's other elements also. Again, there was a change in the management team at Barrett's, and the new management team, which came in shortly after the beginning of the process, basically they were more interested in house building, but not in overall or less so in overall regeneration placemaking. And as I said in answer to your earlier question, the council is interested not only in housing, but in overall placemaking. So things which had started off actually very, very well with Barrett's at first. And I remember working very closely with a woman named Carolyn Tobin there, who was in charge of their human capital, human resources aspect. And we were advancing excellently with discussions about many, many jobs for Enfield people in building Meridian water. And it was kind of a shame when that fell apart, but obviously things didn't work because we didn't sign.
Well, the present council leader has said that it was a bad plan. On reflection, do you think you would have done anything differently?
No, not at all. And actually, it was incredibly dishonest of the current council leader to say that it was a bad plan. She's unable to give any details as to why it was a bad plan. And the reason is because it wasn't. We were advised by top professionals. We had, instead of trying to have just one person throw darts at a wall and say, what shall we do with Meridian water? We had a lot of brain power in the room. The approach that we took was one, as I said before, we were obliged to, through the GLA, to try to go through a master development framework. And number two, we pursued that as best we could. We were obliged legally to give Barrett's and then PCPD as much a full chance to come to a deal with us. Otherwise, the council would have been liable. And it's actually incredibly irresponsible for the current council leader to neglect the legal responsibilities of the council when it's conducting negotiations with private parties. I mean, this is not the sort of thing that a responsible adult will gossip about.
But did you have a governance structure set up in those days that would help to create a framework in case anything went wrong or you had to change the plan?
Yes, from the very outset. Now, even as we, and I say this again for legal reasons, we were obliged and therefore we did give 100% effort to trying to conclude a deal with first Barrett's, then PCPD that would help the council. Even as we were doing that, we weren't stupid. Of course we weren't stupid. You always do scenario planning. We knew there was a possibility that it wasn't going to work. So from the very, very outset, not from the very outset, after a while when it became clear that Barrett's may not work as well, we were preparing what is the plan that's going to be launched now. We refer to it as Plan B. I was also nonplussed by the current council leader saying quite dishonestly that Meridian Water is back on track. That is palpably false. Meridian Water is going to pursue a path that we had set in place between 2014 and 2018. This was always going to happen in case we didn't sign with Barrett's or PCPD. We were always going to go to the quote-unquote self-development model. There's nothing new under the sun. And so it's really underwhelming to hear somebody say that Meridian Water is going to go off in an entirely new direction because a savior has arrived. That's just palpably false.
But the new direction is to have a multi-partner approach. In other words, to have a series of different developers.
That's our plan.
Do you think that's a viable approach, a better approach, or do you have reservations?
No, that is our approach. That was all the current council administration is doing is taking up the Plan B that we prepared. And that was always the Plan B in case the Plan A, which would have been to sign with a single developer, would have been. Now, it's very simple. Signing with a single developer, obviously, if the price had been right for Enfield, if the conditions had been in the interest of Enfield, we would have signed with Barrett's and or PCPD. The reason we didn't sign is because their conditions evolved in a way which was unfavorable to Enfield's interests. Realizing that could happen, we had always set up the possibility of a Plan B. I'm delighted for the current council administration to continue the plans that we put in place years ago. It is the logical thing to do also. We're all adults and professionals. You always have a scenario planning in case something doesn't work. So no, I think it'll work. Now, there is a lesson here, Clearly, the large developers got a little bit frightened by the huge scale of the project. And that's one of the reasons, especially with Brexit happening and uncertainty in the property market, that's one of the reasons why their conditions worsened between the initial procurement offer and the subsequent offer that we're willing to make. The idea now is that with the council developing the phases more one by one and the council itself taking more of a role, that actually means more work for the council, which is fine. It means the work that will be costs for the council to lead. Now, that's fine for the council to pay the cost because after all, we will hopefully be paying lesser margins to the developers who the new council administration will still be calling in on. But will they be calling in on developers for each project one by one instead of a developer for the whole project? And I'm happy with the way things turned out. Is not true. It would have been great to sign with Barrett's and PCPD, but if the deal wasn't good, the deal wasn't good. And we had already set up years ago this Plan B. And to be honest, thank you for allowing me to come on air and set the record straight. It was very dishonest for anybody to say that there's the plan is back on track. This was always the track that we had set up.
So in terms of the master development framework, nothing has changed in your view with the new plan.
No, the master development framework has fallen apart. Master development framework had us having somebody won the procurement exercise. We also had a reserve bidder, a silver medalist. we gave both of them a shot at coming to a final agreement, which was satisfactory. We were sincere and gave 100% effort. We showed due diligence, because let me say this, the council would have been sued had we not given these two master developers 100% shot at giving us a deal. But having given them a shot, and with it not having worked out, now the master development framework falls apart. It doesn't exist anymore. And the council is free now to move on to the plan B that Doug Taylor and Ahmed Eichner and I set up actually years ago. So, I mean, the way things have turned out is actually, it's fine. It's what happens.
I mean, the council leader and the present council are saying that with the scheme they've got now, which you say was always plan B, but with the scheme they've got now, it will give them more control. Now, some people argue that it will, some people it won't. I mean, for example, someone on our site now has just said, I don't think a partner approach will work at all. I mean, you only got one of those partners to say, I can't deliver on the sort of social housing you want. And what do? You either have to accept it or go somewhere else. And you have a never-ending situation where the thing doesn't develop for years and years. Is there a problem that what the present leader and council is saying, that they will have more control, will probably mean actually they may even have less control?
There is that possibility, but to be fair, I still think basically Meridian Water is going to be done. Meridian Water started way back when. It progressed in my time. It will continue to progress beyond the current administration. Because Meridian Water must and will be done, we need to proceed in one way or the other. And if we're not going to proceed, basically there's only two possibilities. The council doesn't have its own construction company. The council has to work with developers in the event. The only question is whether we're going to work with a developer who would then work with other developers, or we're going to do each project separately. We've gone to doing each project separately. That's fine. That's the plan B I always envisioned. The word control gets bandied around a little bit too easily. I don't like it when politicians use words vaguely. You are right to say that even in this new world where the council does project, sub-project by sub-project by sub-project, you're right to say that even in this world, we have to engage with developers who will have conditions, financial conditions, housing conditions, et cetera, et cetera. So your control is never absolute. But the fact is, I think what the current leader doesn't really understand, because I've spoken to her about this, and I don't think she understands the economics. Developers get fearful if the project they're being asked to do is humongous. It's a normal business behavior. The larger the risk, the greater the risk aversion. That's standard finance. I don't think she understands this. By definition, if you're getting somebody to develop a smaller project, they will be hopefully willing and probably willing to give you better conditions because they're doing a smaller project. There's less of a risk for them. Now, it does mean more coordination work on the part of the council, but that's what we're left with, and that's fine. We'll go ahead on that basis. And I think that's the accurate way to talk about what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, someone has put on the site as well, you talk about risk aversion, and he's saying, or she's saying that one of the problems is that Enfield has sought to develop the site prior to Crossrail 2 being granted, and Crossrail 2 provides another risk element in it, and developers sometimes wait to see what will happen, and you want to go ahead, and so you've got this position where developers are not really sure.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think that the person who posted what you just read to me is correct. But what can you do? You want to build Meridian Water. You never have all the elements in place beforehand. I'll give you an example. The Meridian Water Station, which I was proud to sign off on its construction costs. I signed up, under Doug's behest, but it came through my department. I signed up on the Meridian Water Station's construction launch, even before we had finalized, we never did finalize with Barrett's or PCPD. But at a certain point, you have to believe in the project. And there's also a question of putting in place what economists refer to as enabling factors, which is to say that had we not signed off on the Meridian Water Station, nothing else could have got started. So you need to take, like with any investment, I mean, you know, backseat, Monday morning quarterbacks, backseat drivers are a dime a dozen. But the fact is, with any project, you need to get certain things in place for other things to happen. And so it's kind of meaningless. It's actually not very sensible. It doesn't make much sense to say, well, we should wait for all this other stuff to be in place before we get going. It's a chicken and egg proposal. If we don't put certain elements in place, the other stuff won't happen. So somebody's got to start. And and I have to say, we the belief, and dare I say the courage to say, if this is going to happen, we need to go out and make a statement. And one of the statements was, for example, investing in the Meridian Water train station even before Crossrail 2 has been sorted out.
Okay, and another of the sort of risk factors in it is the position of the mayor and what he might be offering in terms of his London plan or his suggestion now about relaxing planning restrictions. Is that another factor that developers worry about?
Yes, and it's a factor that I worried about. And let me say this to show that I'm no longer party political. Things have not got better in that respect since Sadiq Khan came to power. And I say that as an ex-Labor guy, but they've come up with a new London plan, specifically his deputy, a nice guy named Jules Pike. They're kind of inflexible in terms of the way in which SIL, strategic industrial land, is allocated across Enfield. Currently, there's a lot of SIL and Meridian Water. And for Meridian Water to stack up in terms of the number of housing units we can build there, we need to move some SIL designation away from Meridian Water to elsewhere in Enfield. I agree with the GLA, I agree with Sadiq Khan, that all London, including Enfield, needs to keep a quantum of strategic industrial land. I agree with that. However, Meridian Water, you can't put dirty industry right next to nice new housing and Meridian Water. That'll never happen. That'll never sell. So the GLA has not been, the new GLA administration, bless their little socks, they haven't been very flexible in the application of SIL release in the new London plan. And that is an ongoing battle that we had before, when I was still in the administration. And I dare say that if the current administration is honest, they will say that they're having the same battle.
Okay, well, let's look at portfolio valuation, for example. I mean, to what extent, I mean, how much acquisition of land has been made? And there are some people who've argued through an audit report that they've read, for example, that Enfield has bought that land too expensively. And since they bought it, it's dropped in price by about 20%. And therefore, Enfield ratepayers are getting a bad deal. Do you think there's any credence in that?
No, I don't. But I can give you the details of the whole background to that. Number one, certain plots, you're referring to one specific plot of land called Stonehill Industrial Estate. The facts of the matter, and I believe this is public, so I hope I'm not getting into trouble. The facts of the matter is that somebody was looking to build on Stonehill with a construction that would have sabotaged the rest of Meridian Water hadn't we not purchased the land. We purchased the land at a valuation which we didn't pluck out of midair. We purchased the land with a valuation which we got from 3 different sources, that this is what the land was worth, and we bought it at that price. Now, Stonehill, so number one, we bought the land at the valuation that we had, that we received at the time. Valuations do change. However, I do want to say something that I've been very proud of. I've had valuations done of what Meridian Water is worth, and I know what we spent during my time in office in acquiring the more or less 70% of the land that we acquired in the area. And Enfield, when I left, was sitting on a major, major capital gain. And I was very proud of that. I am very proud of that, because I left Enfield with a major capital gain. Now, the truth of the matter is that the funding costs, the money that we borrowed to buy the land, means interest charges for Enfield every year. And those interest charges will eat away at the capital gain that I left Enfield with. That is, unless the land prices continue to rise. But we can't count on that. But the capital gain that I left Enfield with, it'll be eaten away by interest charges unless the development happens relatively soon and unless we get meanwhile uses in place. And so we were attending the whole time I was in power to, number one, to getting meanwhile uses in place to produce some money in the meantime to pay for the funding costs for the money I borrowed to buy the land. And number two, we were trying to get everything done as soon as possible.
Okay, and let's go to another point. Carol Stanley, for example, has said that, I mean, you have an employment strategy, or you had an employment strategy for Meridian Waters. She wants to know whether in that strategy there was a plan to make sure jobs went to local people.
Absolutely.
In other words, what was that strategy, and does it dovetail with the housing objectives as well for affordable housing, so local people can be employed, live there, and have the skills they need?
For the housing objectives, that's a slightly separate conversation. And I believe that my friend Ahmed Oikner, who co-chaired the Meridian Water governance meetings along with me during the last 4 years, I think he's online, and I hope he'll post something about the housing. In terms of the employment, which was my portfolio, absolutely. We've had an employment strategy in place for years. It's a wonderful thing called the Built Environment Training Center. And I encourage if you Google Built Environment Training Center, you will find references online to something which we were looking to solve and which we seem to be solving, which has been a problem worldwide, London-wide, which is getting local workers in to take up the construction jobs. Meridian Water will require about 10,000 people over the next 25 years to be built. In answer to your question, I was very, very, very focused on ensuring that as many of those 10,000 people as possible came from Edmonton, right? I worked closely with local Edmonton councillors to go out into the communities and to try to get people to avail themselves of the training opportunities, which we were also setting up through the Built Environment Training Center. We had fantastic progress. You had some really good guys from Cornell, Andy Forbes, the Further Education College, and Southgate and Barnard. They were going to set up training programs. Barrett's was going to fund them, which is also a problem setting up training programs, is getting funding up front before you have the people. But Barrett's, I got them to agree that it was in their interest that Enfield people take up these, train up and then take up these construction jobs. It was a great thing, the Built Environment Training Center. And that's why one of the reasons I regret that things fell apart with Barrett's. They fell apart for other reasons. But that one aspect, the employment aspect, and getting jobs for local Edmonton people, we had great progress in that. Okay. And all I can do is advise the people who succeed me to keep up with that. I know that the officers love the idea. It's received commendations throughout London, and all I can advise my successors is to continue the work, because it's a way to ensure, as your member says, that the local people take advantage of the jobs. Okay.
You also have another project which you were involved in, a very innovative project, Energetic, which is, the production of local energy in a way, and the distribution of it. How would that have fitted in with the Meridian Water scheme?
So Energetic, also known as the Lee Valley Heat Network, is my baby. I love it. And also, with having had the hottest summer on record, I would hope that everybody realizes that it's quite important to do what we can to reduce our CO2 emissions. And Energetic works by taking the heat, which is sent out of the Edmonton chimney, and just basically packaging that and selling it on as heat. So you don't need to burn new fossil fuels to heat the homes. You just use the heat that we're already producing out of the Edmonton facility. Obviously, Energetic's number one customer will be the houses and Meridian Water, if only for proximity to the Edmonton facility. I can hear another voice.
Go ahead.
Okay. So Energetic, to some extent, relies on Meridian Water happening. Now, I'd like to say something. Meridian Water, the house building is going to start. My friend Ahmed Oikner lined up planning permission more than a year ago for 725 housing units on something called the Teardrop site, which is to the west of Meridian Water. Those houses will be equipped with heating, which will be coming from Energetic Lee Valley Heat Network. And I do need to say one thing. I was told that in her petulance, the new council leader called Energetic a vanity project. And that's got to be the most short-sighted, anti-ecological statement I've ever heard anybody who purports to be a responsible politician make. Energetic's a wonderful thing. It does depend on Meridian Water, although not only. I left in negotiations with other London boroughs trying to get them to buy into the capital, and there was interest in that. So Energetic, yes, the answer is yes, it is related to Meridian Water at first.
Okay, well, two final questions. First of all, some people, as you know, in Haringey, which is our neighbouring borough, have had a lot of heated debate about development, especially
Really?
through the Haringey development vehicle. Now, that's a project that was dependent on the private partner relationship and private-public relationship, anyhow, a partnership, where the private sector were going to have a dominant role. Now, some people are saying the way that Meridian Water is going is exactly the same as what happened in Haringey, in which many Haringey councillors have now rejected. What's your view on that?
So I've been always on the fence in relation to Haringey and HDV, and I'll tell you why. You and I discussed this before, Francis. Very simply, I think both sides could be wrong in the equation, and I think there was and isn't a compromise between the 2 points of view. Let's be honest. What happened in Haringey is you had a political faction wanted to take out another political faction, and they found an excuse to do it. The reality is that councils need to work with the private sector to develop things. The councils don't run their own construction companies. We do not live in the Soviet Union, so you cannot boycott the private sector, and the private sector will require a certain profit margin. Accurate discussion would be a discussion of what particular profit margin the private sector requires. If the private sector requires an excessive profit margin, then you're right to boycott. You're right not to sign with them. You're right to say no, and you're right to send them away. But when the private sector does what you want them to do, serves the public purpose you want them to do at a price which is fair. And I'll give you an example of that. There's a very successful project I left in Enfield. It's called the Montague Industrial Estate, where we signed with a private developer, and they gave us a fair price. I don't think I can go into details, but the profit margin wasn't extortionate. And I have no qualms about having signed with them. They're doing what the state needs done at a price which isn't extortionate. It's the same thing for Meridian Water, same thing for Haringey, but let me speak about Meridian Water. And Meridian Water, Enfield will never build it by itself. It will, whether you have one master developer or no, now we're going to have project by project, you will always have a private sector counterparts, and they need to survive. So they will ask for some sort of profit margin. The whole question is, how big is that profit margin? And that's the devil's in the detail.
Okay, well, one final question, if we could go into this. I mean, because the project is so huge and it involves a lot of partners, and there are a lot of risk aversion factors that you've mentioned, and I'm sure there are many more, some people are actually saying this may not develop for ages. I mean, the benefits may not be felt for years and years and years. And some people have said, it's such a huge dream, it may not even happen. What's your view on that?
Oh, I disagree. They are right to say that it will take years and years. It'll take 20, 25 years is what we're looking at. But it will happen. The marginal propensity to invest retained earnings amongst British companies is the lowest in the OECD. The country needs to accept that certain investments take years to pan out. Meridian Water is no difference. Yes, it will take years. That doesn't mean it's very different to say it will take years than to say it won't happen. It will happen. It should happen. And, successive council administrations will carry it forward. But yes, it will take a long time. And I think you just need to have the courage to follow the vision, to think about the betterment of all of Enfield, and specifically that part of Enfield, and to remain engaged in it. I mean, what's the alternative? Leave a brownfield site down there, miss an opportunity to build housing, miss an opportunity to get people jobs. I mean, the fact is, investments take a long time to pan out. That's how you build a country. And that's the vision I had during my 4 years with Meridian Water. That vision was shared by Doug, by Ahmed, by Dinos, by Achilles. We shared this vision. And all I can hope is that our successors and have the steadfastness to pursue the same vision of long-term investment, and to accept the fact that it will take a long time to pan out. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Alan, for doing that. We've gone just over a half an hour, and I think that was really interesting. And I think we'll be revisiting this issue again and again over the months and years. And indeed, at the end of September, we have an interview with the leader of the council, Nesil Kalaskan, and I'm sure we'll put some questions to her about that then as well. But thank you for raising those issues.
One final point. Meridian Water is a very big, complicated project. It is normal to have more than one person look at it. Meridian Water advanced more quickly when we had several people looking at it. The new council leader has decided to take this under her wing herself. She's wrong. This is something that needs, well, you need more brains in the room. You need more intellectual firepower. It's not very smart to be arrogant. Smart people are humble, and they realize that there are other smart people as well.
Okay. Well, one of the questions we'll ask her is, are you wrong?
Why is she doing it by herself?
No, well, yeah, no, we'll ask her that. But anyhow, let's leave it for now because we've gone through it. But we will ask her some questions, but we're going to be dealing with all of the other issues, so it won't be in depth. We want to look at her whole strategy when we do that. And we're also interviewing Joanne Laban, the leader of the opposition as well, so we'll have both points of view. Sure. Anyhow, thank you very much for doing it, Alan. Thank you for all those who came on. Sorry, everyone, for the sort of technical hitch at the beginning, but once Alan changed his computer, everything went well, so that was great. So it just shows if you change something, it works. And I'm not talking about Meridian Waters. Anyhow, thank you everyone for joining, and we'll end this interview now.